The Ten Commandments changed the history of humanity. What if humanity reached a point where evil had spread so deeply that silence was no longer possible? Not human silence, but divine silence. What if there came a moment when God himself had to intervene, not with suggestions, not with inspiration, but with absolute truth carved into reality? Imagine a world where oppression was normal, where idolatry shaped identity, where truth had been replaced by convenience. Egypt was not just a place of physical slavery. It was a system that trained people to forget who God was and even who they were. And even after freedom came, something remained broken. Chains can fall from the body, but still remain in the soul. Now picture the weight of that moment. A people newly freed, but still thinking like slaves. A nation chosen, but unstable, fearful, easily influenced. And in the middle of it all, one man, not powerful, not confident, not fearless. Moses carried doubts, insecurities, and the memory of failure, yet he was chosen to stand between heaven and a corrupted world. This is not just the story of laws being given. This is the moment where heaven confronted earth. Where God did not adjust to humanity, humanity was called to rise to God. And what was given on that mountain was not just for them. It was for every generation that would ever struggle between truth and deception, including yours. The invisible battle, evil before the commandments. Long before Moses stood on the mountain, long before the thunder, the fire, and the voice of God shook the desert, humanity was already facing a crisis that could not be solved by strength, intelligence, or political freedom alone. The real battle had begun much earlier, and it was far deeper than most people imagine. It was not only a battle over land, labor, or survival, it was a battle over truth itself. It was a battle over the human heart. Because whenever evil wants to rule, it does not begin by destroying everything at once. It begins by changing what people accept. It begins by reshaping what they fear, what they desire, what they call normal, and what they are willing to live without. That is why Egypt matters so much in this story. Egypt was not only the place where the people of Israel suffered. Egypt was a complete system. It had power, structure, wealth, religion, hierarchy, and control. It looked strong. It looked untouchable. It looked like the kind of civilization the world would admire. But beneath that visible greatness was a spiritual darkness that was training an entire people to live disconnected from the holiness of God. Oppression was not merely a political problem there. It was spiritual contamination. The body was enslaved, yes, but the soul was being shaped by everything around it. When a person lives too long inside corruption, corruption starts to feel familiar. That is one of the most dangerous works of evil. Evil does not need to convince people that darkness is good in one single moment. It only needs to make darkness feel ordinary. Day after day, fear becomes normal, injustice becomes routine, false gods become part of culture, compromise becomes survival, and eventually, what should have caused grief begins to cause no reaction at all. That is when a society becomes spiritually numb. That is when people stop asking whether something is true and start asking only whether it is useful, safe, or profitable. This is why idolatry in Egypt was much more than statues, temples, and rituals. Idolatry is always deeper than the image people bow before. Idolatry is the replacement of God. It is the moment something created takes the place that belongs only to the Creator. Sometimes that replacement looks religious. Sometimes it looks political. Sometimes it looks emotional. Sometimes it looks practical. But at its core, idolatry always says the same thing. Trust this instead of God. Fear this instead of God. Build your life on this instead of God. Give your loyalty here, because this is what will protect you, define you, and sustain you. That poison was everywhere in Egypt. It was in the atmosphere. It was in the logic of power. It was in the way people related to authority, security, and identity. And the people of Israel were not immune to it simply because they belonged to the covenant. They were surrounded by a world constantly preaching a false gospel, a gospel of control, a gospel of visible power, a gospel of fear, a gospel that trained them to believe that survival mattered more than holiness, and that submission to corruption was easier than trust in the unseen God. This is what makes the story so urgent. When God delivered Israel from slavery, He was not only taking them out of a location, He was confronting an entire spiritual formation that had marked them deeply. Physical deliverance can happen in a moment, but inward deliverance often takes much longer. A person can leave bondage and still think like a slave. A nation can cross the sea and still carry Egypt in its instincts. This is why freedom is not complete when chains break. Freedom is complete when truth begins to govern the heart. And this is where the invisible battle becomes clear. The deepest enemy Israel faced was not Pharaoh alone. Pharaoh was only one face of a darker reality. The deeper enemy was deception. It was the distortion of reality that teaches human beings to live as though God is distant, holiness is optional, and evil is manageable. Deception is more dangerous than open rebellion because rebellion can be recognized, but deception often hides behind reason, tradition, habit, and emotional comfort. A person in rebellion may still know he is resisting God. A deceived person may believe he is doing what is necessary, wise or harmless, while his heart is drifting farther and farther from truth. That is why divine law was necessary, not because God wanted to burden humanity, but because humanity had become morally disoriented. Without God's revelation, people do not slowly rise into purity by instinct. They drift, they justify, they adapt, they rename sin, they decorate corruption, they normalize what destroys them. The human heart without God does not remain neutral. It creates substitutes, it invents permissions, it lowers standards, it calls bondage freedom and calls holiness restriction. This was already happening in the world before the commandments were given. The commandments would not create the battle. They would expose it, and Moses was called into that exact tension. Before he ever received the tablets, he was already standing in the middle of a silent war between truth and falsehood, worship and idolatry, obedience and compromise. He was not simply leading people away from Egyptian masters. He was leading them into confrontation with everything Egypt had planted inside them. That is why the journey was so difficult. People do not resist only because the path is hard. Sometimes they resist because bondage has become emotionally familiar. The unknown freedom of God can feel more frightening than the predictable misery of old chains. This makes the story painfully relevant. The same invisible battle still exists. The forms may look different, but the conflict has not changed. Evil still works by normalizing what opposes God. It still trains people to trust what they can see more than the one who is eternal. It still offers comfort without holiness, identity without truth, power without righteousness, and spirituality without surrender. And many do not even realize the war is happening because the most effective deception is the one that feels natural. So before the commandments came, before the mountain trembled, before the finger of God wrote truth in stone, the real crisis was already there. Humanity was lost, not only because it suffered, but because it had forgotten how to see clearly. It had learned to live in the middle of evil without recognizing how deeply evil had entered the heart. And that is why what comes next matters so much. God was not about to give rules to people who were already free within. He was about to confront a darkness so rooted, so normalized, so inherited, that only divine truth could break its power. Why Moses? The unlikely weapon against darkness. If God was going to confront a system as powerful and corrupt as Egypt, many would expect him to choose someone naturally imposing, someone fearless, someone politically connected, someone whose voice could dominate a room and whose presence alone could inspire immediate confidence. That is how human logic works. We assume that if the battle is great, the chosen instrument must look obviously strong. But again and again in Scripture, God overturns that expectation. He does not begin with the appearance of power. He begins with surrender. He does not look first at what impresses people. He looks at what can be yielded to him. That is what makes Moses so remarkable. He was not chosen because he looked invincible. He was chosen even though he knew he was not, and that difference matters. Moses had lived through contradictions that could have broken a lesser soul completely. He was born under threat, preserved by providence, raised in Pharaoh's house, yet never fully belonging there. He had access to privilege, but he carried the pain of a deeper identity. He knew the language of power, yet his heart was tied to an oppressed people. He stood between two worlds without fully resting in either one. That kind of life shapes a person in profound ways. It teaches awareness, but it also creates fracture. It gives perspective, but it can leave scars. Then came the moment when Moses acted before he was ready. He saw injustice, burned with urgency, and struck the Egyptian. What happened next was not triumph. It was collapse. He fled. The man who would one day confront Pharaoh first ran from the consequences of his own impulsive strength. This part of the story is essential because it reveals something many people overlook. Moses was not naturally prepared to defeat evil simply because he hated it. Hatred of evil alone is not enough. Zeal alone is not enough. Passion without obedience can still create damage. Good intention without divine timing can still end in fear, exile, and silence. And silence is where God began reshaping him. Moses spent years in the wilderness, away from the palace, away from the center of visible power, away from the urgency of public conflict. To human eyes, it may have looked like failure, detour, or wasted time. But in the hands of God, hidden seasons are never empty. The wilderness strips a person of illusion. It removes applause. It removes the false strength that comes from status, speed, and self-importance. It confronts a soul with itself. There, Moses was no longer the man who might change history by force. He became a shepherd. He learned slowness. He learned obscurity. He learned how little a man truly controls. And often, that is exactly where God begins preparing someone for holy assignment. Because before Moses could stand against Pharaoh, he had to face the Pharaoh-like tendencies inside himself. Before he could challenge a kingdom built on domination, he had to be emptied of the idea that God's work could be accomplished by human intensity alone. Before he could carry divine truth, he had to learn dependence. This is one of the deepest spiritual principles in the story. God often prepares his servants by dismantling the version of themselves they trust too much. So when God called Moses from the burning bush, he was not calling a man full of self-assurance. He was calling a man deeply aware of his limitations. And when Moses responded, his words were not the words of someone eager to display greatness. He questioned, he hesitated, he pointed to his weakness. He doubted his ability to speak, to persuade, to lead, to be received. This is the voice of a man who knew what failure felt like. It is the voice of someone who no longer confused desire with readiness. On one level, that hesitation reveals insecurity, but on another level, it reveals the beginning of a vital transformation. Moses had lost confidence in himself, and that created the space where true reliance on God could be born. This is where many people misunderstand the calling of God. They think God chooses people because they have no fear. But often God chooses people who feel fear intensely and then teaches them to obey anyway. Courage in Scripture is not the absence of trembling. It is the decision to move in faith while trembling remains. Moses did not suddenly become a different kind of human being. He did not wake up as a flawless hero. He was still aware of his voice, his history, his weakness, his past, and the enormous resistance ahead of him. But step by step, he began to discover that God's calling is not based on human adequacy. It is sustained by divine presence. That is why one of the most important shifts in Moses' life was not external but internal. The real battle was not only whether Pharaoh would listen. The real battle was whether Moses would trust the one who sent him. Evil wants to convince the called person that weakness disqualifies them. God shows that surrendered weakness can become a vessel for his power. Evil says you failed before, so you cannot be used now. God says your past does not have the final word when I am the one calling you. Evil says look at your limits. God says, look at my presence. This transforms the entire meaning of Moses' story. He was not the unlikely weapon against darkness because he secretly possessed extraordinary confidence. He was the unlikely weapon because God delights in showing that darkness is not defeated by the pride of man, but by the authority of the one who rules above every empire, every idol, and every lie. Moses becomes powerful not when he feels impressive, but when he agrees to be sent. His transformation is not from weakness to self-glory. It is from fear to obedience, from self-awareness alone to God-awareness, from running away to standing firm because the Lord has spoken. And there is something deeply comforting in that. Many people imagine they cannot be used by God because they are too marked by hesitation, failure, or inner conflict. They assume that to serve God meaningfully, they must first become naturally bold, naturally eloquent, naturally unshaken. But Moses tells a different story. He shows that God is not searching for polished perfection. He is searching for yielded hearts, hearts that will go when sent, hearts that will keep walking when the assignment is heavy, hearts that will stop making weakness an excuse to disobey the voice of God. So why Moses? Because he was already learning the lesson that evil hates most, that a human life fully dependent on God becomes more dangerous to darkness than natural power ever could. Pharaoh had armies. Moses had a calling. Egypt had visible dominance. Moses had divine commission. The empire had wealth, symbols, and fear on its side. Moses had the living God, and in the kingdom of God, that changes everything. The mountain of decision, where heaven touched earth. There are moments in history when everything pauses, when the noise of human ambition fades and something greater breaks through. Mount Sinai was not just another place in the desert. It became the point where heaven confronted earth with undeniable clarity, not through subtle impressions, not through quiet suggestions, but through a presence so overwhelming that it forced an entire nation to recognize that God is not an idea. He is reality. Imagine standing there, the ground trembling beneath your feet, thunder rolling in a way that does not feel natural, fire descending, not consuming randomly, but marking a sacred boundary. A thick cloud covering the mountain, not hiding God, but revealing that his presence cannot be contained or controlled. The sound of a trumpet growing louder and louder, not played by human hands, but announcing something holy, something irreversible, something that demands attention. This was not a symbolic event. This was an encounter that shook both body and soul. The people saw it, they heard it, and they were afraid. That fear was not meaningless. It exposed something important. When humanity stands before true holiness, every illusion collapses. The idea that God can be reduced to preference, adjusted to comfort, or ignored without consequence disappears instantly. In that moment, the people understood something they could not ignore. God is not like anything they had known in Egypt. He is not one more figure to add to a system. He is not one more power to negotiate with. He is absolute. He is holy. And his presence reveals the condition of the human heart with terrifying honesty. This is why they stepped back. This is why they asked Moses to stand in their place. They said, "Speak to us yourself and we will listen, but do not let God speak directly to us or we will die." This reaction reveals the tension that exists in every human being. There is a desire to know God, but also a fear of being fully exposed by Him. There is a longing for truth, but also a resistance to what that truth might require. The mountain did not create that tension. It revealed it. And in the middle of that trembling reality, Moses walked forward. This is where the story shifts from collective fear to personal responsibility. While the people stepped back, Moses stepped in. Not because he was fearless, but because he had learned something essential. The presence of God is not only something to fear, it is something to approach with reverence and trust. Moses had already begun to understand that obedience often means moving closer to God, precisely when everything in you feels overwhelmed. So he ascended. Every step toward the mountain was a step away from human security and a step deeper into divine reality. There was no applause waiting for him there, no reassurance from the crowd, no visible guarantee of what would happen next. There was only the call of God and the weight of the moment. This is what true obedience looks like. It is not always loud or celebrated. Sometimes it is simply the decision to keep going when the presence of God feels both holy and overwhelming. And on that mountain, something happened that changed everything. God spoke, not in confusion, not in contradiction, not in ambiguity. He spoke with authority, clarity, and purpose. The commandments were not invented by human reasoning, they were revealed. They did not come from cultural agreement, they came from divine truth. This matters because it establishes a foundation that cannot be altered by preference. If truth comes from God, then it does not shift with time, opinion, or pressure. It stands. But there is something even deeper here. The commandments were not given in a moment of distance. They were given in a moment of presence. Fire, cloud, sound, trembling, fear, and awe surrounded their delivery. This means the law was never meant to be cold, abstract, or disconnected from relationship. It was given in the context of encounter. The same God who delivered them from Egypt was now revealing how they were meant to live. Freedom was not the end. It was the beginning of responsibility. This is where judgment and mercy meet. Judgment, because the commandments reveal what is right and what is wrong with unmistakable clarity. They remove excuses. They confront behavior. They expose sin. They show that not everything is acceptable and not everything leads to life. But at the same time, there is mercy. Because without that revelation, humanity would remain lost in confusion, calling evil good and good evil, building lives on unstable foundations, and drifting further into darkness without realizing it. The mountain, then, is not just a place of fear, it is a place of alignment, a place where God draws a line between truth and deception, between life and destruction, between what reflects His nature and what distorts it. It is a moment where humanity is invited to stop guessing and start listening, and yet even in that moment a choice remained. The people could hear the voice, see the signs, witness the power, and still decide what they would do with it. The presence of God does not remove human responsibility, it intensifies it. The clearer the truth becomes, the more serious the decision to obey or ignore it becomes. That is why this moment echoes far beyond Sinai. Because the question it raises is not limited to that generation, it is still alive. What do you do when God reveals Himself? Do you step back in fear and keep your distance, or do you move closer in reverence and obedience? Do you treat His word as something optional, or as something that defines reality itself? The mountain stands as a reminder that there are moments when God makes Himself unmistakably known. And in those moments, neutrality is no longer possible. The Ten Commandments, not rules, but weapons against evil. When the voice of God broke through the fire and the thunder, what was given was not a list meant to restrict life, but a revelation meant to restore it. The Ten Commandments were not designed to burden humanity, but to rescue it from a condition it could no longer recognize on its own. Because when truth disappears, people do not become free. They become vulnerable. Vulnerable to deception, to manipulation, to internal confusion, and to systems that redefine right and wrong according to power, not according to righteousness. This is why the commandments must be understood correctly. If they are seen only as rules, they will feel heavy. But if they are seen as divine responses to specific forms of evil, everything changes. Each commandment confronts something that was already destroying human life. Each one exposes a lie that had become normal. Each one draws a boundary that protects what is sacred. The first commandment confronts the deepest distortion of all. You shall have no other gods before me. This is not about control, it is about alignment. When God is replaced, everything else falls out of order. Identity becomes unstable, purpose becomes confused. The human heart begins to search endlessly for something to worship, something to trust, something to build life upon. And if God is not at the center, something else will take his place. That replacement may look harmless at first, but it always leads to distortion, because nothing created can carry the weight of what only the Creator can sustain. Then comes the commandment against idols. You shall not make for yourself a carved image. This goes even deeper. It is not only about what you worship, but how you attempt to control what you worship. An idol is something you can shape, manage, and adjust. It gives the illusion of spirituality without the reality of surrender. It allows people to feel religious while remaining in control. But the living God cannot be reduced to something manageable. This commandment destroys the illusion that God can be shaped to fit human desire. It calls humanity back to reverence, to humility, to truth. The commandment concerning the name of God continues this pattern. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. This is not merely about speech. It is about representation. To carry the name of God lightly, falsely, or manipulatively is to distort his character. It is to use what is holy for what is empty. And this happens more often than people realize. Whenever God's name is used to justify what he does not approve or to cover what he does not endorse, truth is corrupted. This commandment protects the integrity of who God is. Then there is the call to remember the Sabbath. At first glance, it may seem different from the others, but it addresses a powerful form of hidden bondage. You shall remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. This commandment confronts the idea that human worth is defined by constant production. It restores rhythm, rest, and dependence on God. In a world driven by control and exhaustion, the Sabbath declares something radical. You are not sustained by your own effort alone. Life does not depend only on what you can produce. There is a deeper source, and you are invited to trust it. The commandments that follow begin to shape human relationships directly. Honor your father and your mother. This is not only about family structure, it is about recognizing authority, order, and continuity. When this breaks down, society begins to fracture at its foundation. Then comes the command against murder. You shall not kill. This restores the value of life itself. In a world where violence had become normalized, this commandment draws a clear line. Life is not yours to take. It belongs to God. The command against adultery confronts another destructive force. You shall not commit adultery. This protects covenant, trust, and the sacredness of relational commitment. Without it, relationships become transactional, unstable, and driven by impulse rather than faithfulness. Then comes the command against stealing. You shall not steal. This restores justice and respect for what belongs to others. It confronts greed, entitlement, and the idea that one can take without consequence. The command against false witness addresses truth itself. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. Lies do not only distort information, they destroy trust, manipulate perception, and create realities that harm others. Truth is essential for life to function as it should. Without it, everything becomes unstable. Finally, the command against coveting reaches into the deepest part of the human heart. You shall not covet. This is where many external sins begin. It confronts desire before it becomes action. It addresses comparison, dissatisfaction, and the restless hunger for what belongs to someone else. When seen together, these commandments form something powerful. They are not random instructions. They are a complete framework that confronts evil at its roots. They restore alignment with God, integrity in worship, reverence in speech, balance in life, honor in relationships, protection of life, faithfulness in covenant, justice in possession, truth in communication, and purity in desire. This is why they are not merely rules, they are weapons. Not weapons of violence, but weapons of truth. They expose what destroys and point toward what sustains. They do not only tell people what to avoid, they reveal what leads to life. And yet, even with all of this clarity, something unexpected happens next. The fall after the revelation, when people chose evil again. What makes this part of the story so unsettling is not simply that people sinned, it is how quickly they did it. The mountain had not faded from memory, the thunder was still recent, the fear was still fresh. The voice of God had not spoken generations earlier through distant tradition. It had just shaken the ground beneath them. They had seen deliverance with their own eyes. They had watched the sea open. They had walked through judgment and mercy. They had witnessed the collapse of Egypt's power and the faithfulness of the God who brought them out. And yet, in astonishingly little time, their hearts began turning back toward the very darkness from which they had been rescued. This reveals something uncomfortable, but necessary. External revelation does not automatically produce inward transformation. A person can witness power and still remain divided inside. A nation can hear truth and still long for familiar corruption. The human heart is capable of standing near holiness while secretly craving substitutes that feel easier to control. That is what makes the golden calf so tragic. It was not merely an act of impatience, it was a return to a way of thinking that Egypt had trained into them. Moses was on the mountain, the people could not see him. The process was taking longer than they wanted. The visible mediator was absent, the waiting became heavy, and uncertainty began to stir anxiety. And when anxiety is not surrendered to God, it starts searching for something immediate to cling to. Something visible, something manageable, something that feels reassuring, even if it is false. So they said, "Make us gods who will go before us." That sentence exposes the deeper issue. They did not only want direction, they wanted a form of direction that fit their emotional need for instant certainty. The living God had already gone before them, already delivered them, already revealed himself. But the living God could not be reduced to an object. He could not be shaped by their fear. He could not be summoned according to their timing. So instead of surrendering their uncertainty, they sought a substitute that would make them feel secure without requiring trust. This is one of the oldest patterns of evil. Evil often offers visible comfort in exchange for invisible ruin. It gives the appearance of peace while eroding the soul. It says, "Take what calms you now, even if it corrupts you later." And that is exactly what the calf represented. It was not simply metal formed into an image. It was the collapse of trust. It was the exchange of divine presence for human invention. It was the attempt to create a God that demanded less faith and allowed more control. And the most sobering part is this: they did not think they were abandoning spirituality. They were trying to recreate it on their own terms. That is why this moment is so spiritually dangerous. Open rebellion can at least be recognized for what it is. But counterfeit worship is harder to detect because it often keeps religious language while rejecting true surrender. It still talks about worship, still uses sacred terms, still gathers people in emotional expression, but its center is no longer the holy God. Its center becomes human desire, human fear, human timing, human control. This is not merely ancient history. It is a warning that reaches every generation, because many people do not reject God by choosing obvious darkness. They drift by reshaping devotion into something easier, softer, safer, more convenient, something that does not confront them too deeply, something that allows emotion without obedience, something that gives reassurance without holiness. The golden calf was the visible form of an inward condition that still exists whenever people prefer a manageable version of faith over the living truth of God. And Moses, while receiving divine revelation on the mountain, was also being prepared to witness the heartbreak of leadership below it. This is where the story becomes intensely personal. Moses had risked everything for these people. He had faced Pharaoh. He had endured resistance. He had carried the burden of their complaints, their fears, their needs, and their future. He stood between them and destruction more than once. He ascended into the presence of God, not for his own elevation, but for the sake of a people who needed truth. And while he was there, they were already turning away. This kind of betrayal cuts differently. It is one thing to face an enemy. It is another thing to be wounded by those you are trying to help. Moses did not come down the mountain to discover minor weakness. He came down to discover spiritual collapse, celebration around rebellion, movement around corruption, noise around idolatry. The very people who had been brought out of bondage were now dancing around the image of a new bondage they had made with their own hands. That is one of the most painful truths in spiritual life. People can be delivered from oppression and still choose what destroys them. They can cry for freedom and then resist the truth that makes freedom real. They can long for rescue, but reject the formation that rescue requires. This is why knowing truth is not the same as living it. The people had received revelation, but revelation had not yet fully penetrated their desires. They knew what God had said, but their hearts were still vulnerable to fear, impulse, nostalgia, and pressure. And that shows us something essential. Evil does not always return through dramatic denial. Sometimes it returns through impatience, through emotional instability, through the inability to wait faithfully, through the refusal to remain surrendered when God is not moving according to our preferred pace. The fall after revelation is so shocking precisely because it proves that spiritual moments alone are not enough. Powerful experiences can awaken the heart, but if the inner life is not anchored in obedience, the old patterns quickly return. That is why the giving of the commandments had to be followed by a deeper call. Not only hear, obey. Not only witness, become. Not only tremble in the moment, walk in truth when the moment passes. The golden calf stands as a permanent warning that the greatest threat after receiving truth is assuming that hearing it was enough. It was not enough for them, and it is not enough for us. Evil does not surrender simply because truth was spoken once. It must be resisted through ongoing faithfulness, ongoing surrender, ongoing alignment with the God who speaks. And what Moses does next reveals one of the most powerful lessons in the entire story. How Moses overcame evil, obedience over emotion. When Moses came down from the mountain and saw what the people had done, the weight of that moment cannot be overstated. This was not a small failure. This was not a momentary weakness hidden in private. This was open rebellion, collective corruption, a visible rejection of the very God who had just revealed his holiness in unmistakable power. The sound of celebration filled the air, but it was not the sound of victory. It was the sound of distortion, of confusion, of a people turning truth into something unrecognizable. Moses saw it, and his reaction was real. He did not stand there unmoved. He did not pretend that everything was acceptable. The anger he felt was not random emotion. It was a response to the collision between divine truth and human corruption. The tablets he carried were not ordinary objects. They represented the very words of God, the foundation of a new way of life. And in that moment, faced with such immediate betrayal, Moses threw them down and broke them. This act reveals something important. Emotion itself is not the enemy. There are moments when what we feel reflects the seriousness of what is happening. There are moments when indifference would be the real problem. But what defines a person is not the presence of emotion. It is what they choose to do next. Because Moses could have stopped there. He could have walked away. He could have said, "This people is too unstable, too resistant, too broken to lead." He could have allowed frustration to define his response. He had every reason from a human perspective to abandon them. They had rejected God. They had betrayed the covenant. They had proven how quickly they could fall. Why continue? Why intercede? Why carry the weight any longer? This is where obedience separates itself from emotion. Instead of stepping back permanently, Moses stepped forward again, but this time in a different posture. He returned to God, not to accuse the people, but to intercede for them. This is one of the most powerful moments in the entire narrative. Moses stands before God and acknowledges the sin. He does not minimize it. He does not justify it. He does not pretend it is something small. But at the same time, he does not turn his back on the people. He pleads. He asks for mercy. He places himself in the gap between divine justice and human failure. At one point, his words reach a depth that reveals his heart completely. He says that if God will not forgive them, then remove his own name as well. This is not manipulation. This is not performance. This is the expression of a leader who has chosen love and responsibility over personal comfort. Moses was no longer driven by the need to prove himself. He was driven by the desire to see restoration, even at great personal cost. This is what obedience looks like at its highest level. It is not simply following instructions when things are easy. It is remaining aligned with God when everything inside you could justify walking away. It is choosing to act according to truth, even when emotion pulls you in another direction. It is refusing to let disappointment redefine your calling. And this is where evil loses ground. Because evil often expects one of two reactions. It expects either passive acceptance or complete withdrawal. It wants people to either tolerate corruption or abandon responsibility. But Moses chose a third path. He confronted the sin, but he did not abandon the people. He felt the weight of the moment, but he did not allow emotion to control his final response. He moved back toward God, and in doing so, he became an instrument of restoration instead of a witness of destruction. This is deeply significant. Overcoming evil is not only about resisting what is wrong externally, it is also about refusing to let what is wrong change who you are internally. It is possible to oppose evil and still become hardened, bitter, or detached. But Moses demonstrates something different. He shows that true strength is not found in reaction, but in alignment, not in impulse, but in obedience. And obedience here is not passive, it is active, costly, and intentional. Moses continues to lead, he continues to stand in the gap, he continues to seek God's presence. He does not reduce his role because the people failed. He deepens his dependence because the situation requires more than human capacity. There is a lesson here that reaches far beyond this moment. Many people believe they can overcome evil through intensity, through personal strength, through emotional reaction, or through control. But those approaches are unstable. They may create temporary movement, but they do not produce lasting transformation. What sustains a person in the face of evil is not how strongly they feel, but how deeply they are rooted in obedience to God. Because obedience anchors the soul when emotion fluctuates. It keeps direction clear when circumstances become chaotic. It prevents a person from being driven only by what they feel in the moment. It aligns action with truth, not with impulse. Moses did not overcome evil because he never felt anger, frustration, or disappointment. He overcame it because those emotions did not define his final decision. His final decision was to remain faithful to God, to intercede for others, and to continue the mission that had been entrusted to him. That is where victory begins, and that is where the story turns towards something even more personal. The commandments today. Why this story is about you. It is easy to look at this story and see it as something distant, a mountain in the desert, a people from another time, a leader chosen for a specific moment in history. But the truth is far more confronting than that. This is not just their story. It is a mirror. It reveals patterns that are still alive, still active, still shaping the way people think, choose, and live today. Because the same invisible battle did not end in Egypt. It did not end at Sinai. It continues in quieter forms, often hidden behind modern language, modern systems, and modern distractions. The world may look different, but the tension remains the same. Truth still confronts deception. Worship still competes with idolatry. Obedience still stands against compromise. And every person, whether they realize it or not, is standing somewhere in that tension. Look closely at the commandments again, not as ancient statements, but as living truth. You shall have no other gods before me. That challenge still exists, but now it often appears in more subtle ways. People may not bow before statues, but they build their lives around things that promise identity, security, and meaning apart from God. Success, control, recognition, pleasure, independence. None of these are neutral when they take the place that belongs only to God. The form changes, but the principle remains. You shall not make for yourself an idol. Today, this often becomes the attempt to reshape God into something comfortable. A version of God that does not confront, does not require surrender, does not challenge behavior, does not call for transformation. A God that agrees instead of leads. A God that comforts without correcting. But that is not the living God. That is a reflection of human desire. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. This extends beyond words spoken carelessly. It includes the way God is represented through life. When someone claims to follow God but lives in contradiction to his truth, his name is being carried without weight. This creates confusion, not only internally, but in the eyes of others who are trying to understand what faith really means. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. In a world driven by speed, pressure, and constant activity, this commandment feels almost impossible to many. But that is exactly why it matters. It confronts the belief that value comes only from productivity. It calls people to stop, to realign, to recognize that life is sustained by God, not by endless effort. Without this, the soul becomes exhausted, disconnected, and restless. Honor your father and your mother. Respect for authority, structure, and legacy continues to shape the stability of human life. When this is lost, relationships become fragile, and identity becomes uncertain. You shall not kill. The value of life remains non-negotiable, even in a world where violence can be justified, ignored, or normalized in different forms. You shall not commit adultery. Faithfulness continues to stand against a culture that often elevates desire above commitment. You shall not steal. Integrity still confronts the temptation to take what is not yours, whether through action, manipulation, or subtle compromise. You shall not bear false witness. Truth remains essential, even in a time where information can be distorted, reshaped, and used to influence perception. And you shall not covet. This may be one of the most relevant commandments today. Comparison, dissatisfaction, and constant exposure to what others have create a restless heart that is never at peace. Desire becomes endless and gratitude disappears. When seen this way, the commandments are not outdated, they are precise. They speak directly into the same struggles people face now. They reveal that the human condition has not changed as much as people assume. Technology has advanced, systems have evolved, but the heart still wrestles with the same issues: identity, truth, desire, control, trust. And this is where the story becomes personal, because just like the people at the mountain, you have moments where truth becomes clear. Moments where something inside you recognizes what is right, what is wrong, what needs to change, what needs to be surrendered. But clarity alone does not decide anything. The decision comes after. The decision is whether you will align your life with that truth or slowly move away from it. Many people want guidance, but resist surrender. They want direction, but avoid obedience. They want peace, but without confronting what disrupts it. And that tension creates instability. It creates a life that hears truth but does not fully live it. A life that recognizes God but still holds on to substitutes. This is exactly why the commandments still matter. They are not there to limit you. They are there to reveal what leads to life and what leads away from it. They expose what is shaping you, often without you noticing. They bring to the surface what is hidden in desire, in thought, in intention. And the question is no longer about a mountain in the past. The question is about your life now. Final message: the choice every soul must make. At the center of this story is not only Moses, not only the mountain, not only the commandments, and not only the failure of the people. At the center of this story is a choice that appeared there in the desert, but that has never stopped confronting the human soul. Because whenever God reveals truth, a line is drawn. Not a line between perfect people and broken people, because everyone in this story was flawed. The line is drawn between those who will respond to God with surrender and those who will keep resisting Him, even while standing near His voice. This is why the story still carries so much force. The people of Israel were not destroyed by ignorance alone. They were confronted with truth. They were delivered. They were guided. They were warned. They were invited into covenant. But none of those things removed their responsibility to choose how they would live before God. And the same is true now. Hearing truth is not the same as being changed by it. Admiring what is holy is not the same as yielding to it. Feeling emotionally moved is not the same as becoming obedient. That is where many people remain divided. They admire the idea of God, but do not want His authority. They want His promises, but resist His correction. They want comfort in pain, but not transformation in character. They want mercy, but without repentance. They want spiritual reassurance, but not surrender. Yet the commandments reveal something deeper than moral duty. They reveal the heart of God. They show that His holiness is not cruelty. His standards are not random. His truth is not given to crush life, but to rescue it from everything that quietly corrupts it. Every commandment is a declaration that evil does not deserve to rule the human heart. Every commandment is a refusal from heaven to leave humanity trapped in confusion. Every commandment says that there is still a way to live in truth, a way to walk in order, a way to resist darkness without becoming part of it. And still, the choice remains. You cannot remain neutral forever between truth and deception. Neutrality feels safe for a time, but it is an illusion. The heart is always moving towards something. Every day, through decisions, desires, habits, loyalties, and thoughts, a direction is being formed. You are becoming someone. You are building your life on something. You are trusting something to define what matters, what is acceptable, what is worth obeying, what is worth sacrificing for. That is why this message must become personal. The question is no longer only what the people did in front of the mountain. The question is what you are doing with the truth that has reached you. What have you allowed to take God's place in your heart? What do you turn to for identity, for security, for meaning, for comfort? Where have you slowly accepted what God has already made clear? Where have you heard truth but delayed obedience because the cost felt too high, the timing felt inconvenient, or the surrender felt too deep? These are not small questions. They are the questions that reveal whether a soul is moving toward life or drifting towards spiritual numbness. And there is another layer to this story that cannot be ignored. Moses stood between the people and judgment. He interceded. He pleaded. He carried the burden of a rebellious people before a holy God. In that, he points beyond himself. He points toward the deeper reality that humanity has always needed more than instruction alone. We need mercy. We need mediation. We need someone to stand in the gap when our own hearts expose how unstable we are. The commandments reveal what is right, but they also reveal how deeply human beings need God, not only as lawgiver, but as Savior. This is why the message of the commandments in the light of Christian faith does not end at Sinai. It continues toward the full revelation of God's holiness and mercy. The same God who spoke from the mountain is the God who continues to call people out of darkness and into truth. He still confronts idolatry. He still opposes deception. He still exposes what destroys the soul. But he also still extends the call to return, to repent, to realign, to walk with him. That means no one listening to this message has to remain the same. If your heart has been divided, it can be surrendered. If your mind has been confused, it can be renewed. If your life has been shaped by false priorities, it can be reordered. If you have grown distant, numb, or spiritually tired, the voice of God still calls you back. But the call cannot be answered halfway. The people at Sinai could not receive holy truth and then continue treating evil as harmless. Moses could not stand in God's presence and then live as though nothing had happened. And you cannot encounter the weight of this story and remain comfortably untouched if you truly understand what it means. The God who gave the commandments did not speak to entertain curiosity. He spoke to summon response. So this is the real question that remains after everything else has been said. Will you follow the path that leads to life, even when it demands surrender? Will you let truth search you, correct you, and realign you? Will you keep shaping faith around your comfort, or will you yield to the God who refuses to be reduced to human preference? Will you continue negotiating with what you know is pulling you away from him, or will you finally place it at his feet? Because the voice that shook the mountain was not only a voice of power, it was a voice of invitation. A call out of confusion, a call out of compromise, a call out of false worship and divided loyalty, a call into a life that is no longer governed by the darkness around you, but by the truth of the God who still speaks. And that leaves only one final decision. When God makes his way clear, will you listen and obey, or will you walk away and keep building your life on what cannot save you?